and the softer one is the semilunar valve. Cool. We know that the heart is definitely a double pump, and we call this part the systolic and the diastolic reaction. Systolic is where the heart contracts and squeezes, so this is when the ventricles are going to close and push, and the diastolic is kind of where the heart opens and sort of relaxes to let us sort of redo all the steps. And then there's a little section in the middle that's called the quiescence period, where the heart sort of relaxes and gets ready to go again. So if we look at how the heart does this, there are definitely different heartbeats. So if we look at a wave, this is called a PQRST wave. The P wave is, and you're definitely going to see this on exams, and you're definitely going to see this in the field. The P wave basically is where we see that the atriums are opening. We're looking at the electrical current that's going through the heart, and by looking at this, we can see what the heart is doing at each of these different subsects of this wave. The P wave is where the atriums are opening and blood is coming in from either the inferior vena cava or the pulmonaries. So deoxygenated on this side and oxygenated on this side. Keep in mind the tricuspids and bicuspids are closed. We then go into the Q to the R, and what happens in the Q to the R is as the electricity comes down, the Q is going to make it so the valves open. We're going to start in the Q to the R. You can see that there's a lot of work going into this, and that work is basically where the ventricles are starting to open, and that's allowing another power to push that blood in. So not just do we have the ventricles opening so blood could come down, but we also have that suction coming in. And we have to do this because if we just waited for gravity to do this, let's say you were laying down, this wouldn't be very efficient. Or better yet, let's say you were upside down for whatever reason for a while. The suction will still make it so liquid will go from your atriums to your ventricles. So we don't have to just rely on gravity. So not just do we have blood coming down and falling into the ventricles from mostly gravity, but if you are upside down, the suction of these opening and these guys contracting is going to push the blood down. That's going to happen from the Q to the R. Can you see how from the R to S it looks like a push? I almost think about this like a squeezing step. And what happens at the R to the S is this is where those ventricles are actually going to contract. So we actually have a couple of things going on. The Q to the R is where the ventricles open. Also in this period, those tricuspid and bicuspid valves close. As this gets to its fullest opening for the ventricles, we're going to start to go from the R to the S. And this is where the ventricles are going to actually push in. And by pushing in, what's going to happen is we're going to move blood. And this is not the greatest picture, but it's going to move it to either the aorta or the pulmonaries. And if these valves were open, clearly blood would just slosh back up and then slosh back down. That wouldn't help us. So these have to be closed, and blood will go to either the aorta or it's going to go to the pulmonaries and go wherever it needs to go. But now the heart is completely squeezed on this side. So what we have to do is recalibrate it at the T, and the T is going to make it so the ventricles open back up. So here they basically opened, then squeezed. So now what we want to do is go back to the heart being completely at rest. So we can go back into doing the P wave, and then eventually go to the QRS complex, and then T. What you're looking at this side is called the 6-second strip, and the 6-second strip should typically have 6 heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And anything that is more or less than that is going to be a problem. So here with the fast heartbeat, we have 8 heartbeats. With the slow heartbeat, we have 4. And then with a regular heartbeat, you can see that there's a gap going on. You can see that the T wave looks a little weird and out of control. there's too many things going on. Even with this one, you can see that the waves don't actually look like they're in the perfect unison. Like this one looks a little longer to me. But what we're really doing is the take-home message here is that this one doesn't have 6, something's wrong. This one doesn't have 6, something's majorly wrong. And this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It does have 6, but this one's majorly wrong. The space, and then can you see how these two looks kind of smushed together? Something's going wrong here. And from this, the doctor or you in the future can do a diagnostic test and figure out what's going on. Is it something like this, where we're having a pacemaker just going too slow for a reason? Is it something like this, where the pacemaker node is firing incorrectly, and we have to either intervene by replacing the pacemaker or going ahead and hitting it with electricity and seeing if it goes back to normal? And we're going to do this with an electrocardiogram. We're going to actually do one in lab, and we're measuring action potential and seeing what's happening in this complex. And we'll do it by looking at these PQRST waves. I kind of like looking at these pictures a little better because you can see what's happening at each of these waves and see what the heart is doing. So red is going to be contracting and green is going to be relaxing. So here we are at the P wave. Blood is coming in, and that's what you're seeing right over here. As we keep going, you can see that the valves will sort of open slowly, and that's going to allow, so in this section, the valves are closed. What's going to happen slowly here is the valves are going to open. Blood is going to sort of push down here into the ventricles. And when we get here, we're going to see that the valves open. The ventricles are going to start to swell. So you can see how they're swollen here versus here they're contracted. They're swelling. As blood starts to come into this area, we're going to close those valves. And you can see that the ventricles are definitely swollen. When we go to our next one, that's going to be our R to the S, and that's where we're going to push the ventricles. You can see how they went from sort of swollen here, open, to completely kind of closed and pushed. And that's going to move blood to the pulmonaries and the aorta. And then finally, what's going to happen in the T is that we're going to get the heart to completely relax and jump right into our next P wave. And you can kind of read this. That's basically what I was just talking about. With this one, you're going to go ahead and look to see what's up with these EKG readings. And again, you can see with this first one, it's pretty normal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One of them's been cut off, but there's 6. That's pretty normal rhythm. Our next one, which is B, you could see that something's wrong, and really that P wave is missing, so there's no SA node activity, so that doesn't get the rest of them to work usually, but there's some electrical current that's still pushing them through. With our C one, there's a heart blockage. That's why you're not getting all of our PQRST waves in the beginning. You're seeing some PQRST waves in the beginning, and then you see nothing, 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 and it starts up again. And this is usually a heart block, maybe a missing ventricle. And then finally, oh, with this one, this is bad news. So this is where you can see the ventricle fibrillation. So that's going to be where the electrical current is definitely not working. That PQRST wave is not working, and the heart is definitely not doing anything in this stage. Again, we can look at the PQRST wave and figure out what's happening with the body. So we know that PQR, that's going to be the diastolic, that's the push. And then R to the S is where it's going to squeeze, that's going to be the systolic. And what we're going to hear here is the semilunars opening. The diastolic, we're going to hear the tricuspid and bicuspid valves. With issue with the heart, what we're going to do is sort of restart it, like if your computer's doing something weird, and that's going to be happening with a defibrillator, and that's basically going to go ahead and hit the heart with a little electricity and restart the pacemaker node. Oh, wow, this is a long one. Okay, let me stop here.